Hi, it's Kirby Summers. Today is April 23rd, 2025, and I want to read to you most of an article that I wrote after the unaliving date of Pope Francis and some information about Queen Elizabeth and, frankly, the royal family. Before I get started, I want to thank Ashley O., Isaac S., Carrie D, Anna M for the super thanks. And these four people were kind enough to go to my website, do a one-time contribution, which helps me keep almost 90%, as opposed to something that's done on this platform, which, as you know, the content creator, meaning me, and anybody else who does things like me, may keep only about 50%. So while most of this article is behind a paywall, I'm going to read some of the stuff that's behind a paywall here. I'm going to share it with you. Now, heads up, I'm going to have to be super careful, which is why, so just the way I'm going to refer to the mother of King Charles is by referring to her as Elizabeth, okay? The way I'm going to refer to Pope Francis is I'm just going to call him Francis or Frank, depending on where I am here. I may have to spell one word, and I hope that's the only word I'm going to have to spell. And then the person we cannot name is going to be referred to as the person we cannot name. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is that I am going to be using my Instagram. And the link is included below. It's the last one after all of my socials, and it's at Real Kirby Summers. Okay, so that's where I'll be posting and including a lot of information as well as all of my other platforms. And so I stumbled across some information some years ago based on the fact that I'm always researching. And I stumbled upon something. So I'm going to start reading. And again, keep in mind that I may have to refer to someone as something or other, but you will understand what I'm saying. I can say Pope Francis died on Easter Monday, April 21st, and while many people remain suspicious about the timing, what came to my mind was something I discovered a couple of years ago regarding J.E., Elizabeth, the British royal family, and the Catholic Archdiocese. So right now I'm reading to you from my article. We've all heard the horrifying stories of how the church and the crown have had allegations of blank and blank. But did you know that Elizabeth owned a building in New York which housed the hottest PORNO bookstore? Question mark. Did you? If you're following me on Substack, you did, because you heard it from me. All right, I'm going to keep reading. And did you know there was a straight line connection from the Catholic Archdiocese to J.E.? And no, I don't mean the photo op of J.E.N. Gillen shaking the hand of Pope John Paul II. No, 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 no. There's more. There's much more to this story. So in a now scrubbed and obscure article from the 1970s, which basically has the title, Does Liz Own New York site of blank shop? Which I took a screenshot of and I shared it, and I literally had to sit down because the article is very blurry and type it verbatim and share it on my Substack. But I'm going to read this to you. So I'm beginning to read the article from the 1970s. It's the hottest PORNO bookstore in Times Square, where the most ignoble tastes are catered to. And the big question that real estate circles are asking is the building owned in part by the noblest family of them all, the royal family of England. Buckingham Palace denies it emphatically through a spokesman. But the Standard Abstract Corporation, publisher of a well-regarded real estate directory, lists the land or fee for property at 150 West 42nd Street, just off Broadway, as belonging to an organization reputed to represent the royal family of England. A private, unofficial compilation of real estate owners collected by the Office of Midtown Planning also lists the property as belonging to the royal family. The Book Emporium, called the Adult World of Books and Magazines, is at the crossroads of the world, meaning Times Square, and it is the sleaziest bookstore and picture-filled magazines, which are suited to their unusual clientele. When we list an entry, we take into account not only documents on file with the Hall of Records, but information we receive from informed real estate people, says a researcher for Standard Abstract. In this case, our information says the fee is owned by the royal family. The land under the 15-story building is listed in the name of Inch Corporation, but Standard Abstract, as well as the Office of Midtown Planning, regards this as a front used in America for the royal family. Thomas Parkinson, a lawyer who represents this company, denies the British connection. But real estate sources point to Inch's involvement in other British investments in New York City, and they go on to list a couple of other places that are owned by the royal family in the United States. And then it goes on to say the Inch Corporation made headlines recently when it sought to evict Jack Dempsey's restaurant from a building the corporation owns in downtown on Broadway. And then they go on to say that the building at 150 West 42nd Street is leased by Helmsley Spear. The building houses offices and a number of commercial shops, in addition to the Adult World bookstore. We merely pay rent, says Alvin Schwartz, vice president of Helmsley Spear. The rent is paid to Henry Hart Rice, a prominent real estate firm. And then it goes on to add, Rice, hold on. It goes on to add, Rice won't say whom he is collecting rent for, but denies emphatically that the money could end up in Buckingham Palace. In London, a royal family spokesman stated all the Queen's business is transacted by her bankers. And then they list the name of her bankers. Informed palace sources told Henry Maule, the News British correspondent, the Queen would not likely employ foreign agents for the suggested transaction, where her long tried and trusted bankers have been extremely satisfactory. I want to interject here and say that is untrue. There are intermediaries. We know, as I have explained in previous podcasts, that, let's say, for example, the three-letter agency uses cutouts. I have also explained how corporations are used as umbrella companies under which they form other divisions. And so that it is very difficult when this is done, which is done routinely just by the different corporations, to hide the ownership, the true ownership. And this is really what's happened in this case, except that the real estate offices that made the initial investigation did, let's say, a breach the umbrella, and they did manage to link it to the property being owned by the royal family. So it goes on. I'm going to go back to reading the article. The 42nd Street building at one time housed the old Knickerbocker Hotel and later the offices of Newsweek magazine. So what I want to stop here and add is I'm unaware if you know that there are several magazines that are directly cutouts, if you will, of the agency I discuss on this platform a lot, the Intel apparatus. One of them is Newsweek. And so it does not surprise me that this building would have been the home for Newsweek magazine at one time. And then I'm going to keep going and I'm going to read some more of this article to you. The royal family itself is known to have owned an enormous amount of property in New York at one time, but it reportedly divested itself of much of that during the 1930s and 40s to finance the war effort. And so what I did was there was a photo of the bookstore, what I'm going to be including somewhere in the photo that I use for this podcast, so you can see it for yourself. So what I want to say is I go into who owns what and how it connects to the Catholic Archdiocese, and then how the Catholic Archdiocese, including Pope Francis, is connected to the world of JE and the people surrounding him, which is on my Substack. Now, I want to remind you that when we saw the so-called non-prosecution agreement, no, not the non-prosecution, forgive me, the Victims' Compensation Fund, if you recall that, the person whose name was initially attached to that is a man by the name of Eric I think it's Feinberg. Check me on that because I don't have the name in front of me and I'm just going on memory. And Feinberg was also in charge of creating the compensation fund for the victims of that horrible day in September on the 11th day. And I had to say that in that way, but you understand what I'm saying. In addition to which, not coincidentally, from where I sit and from the research that I keep uncovering, is that Feinberg also was involved in the, let's call it reparations, settlements for victims of the Catholic Church. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of this thought, was also involved with the reparations, compensation, ridiculously high compensations, by the way, in the millions of dollars for the JE women who are now women. And, basically, I have also said on this channel that the attorney that was responsible, or it wasn't his job, but David Boies made it his business. And David Boies, along with J. Stanley Pottinger and Bradley Edwards, represented most of the women who stepped forward. And it was but a fraction of the women or the people, because there were also men. And no one's talked about the men. But David Boies actually created the contract, which made it so that if a person decided to accept the settlement of the compensation fund, that person had to then drop any and all lawsuits against all, let's say, conspirators and or co-conspirators, both known and unknown. So I see this as a bribe. So I just want to remind you again that in the Catholic settlements, the amount is usually capped at $20,000. In the settlements that were obtained by Boies, Pottinger, and Edwards, the amount was as high as $5 million. I want you to let that sink in, because I don't think you guys understand how all of this, it's just circles within circles, and how we had what I call fixers insert themselves into the life of, let's say, Virginia and the others, and conduct an operation in plain sight, and how this then loops back into the archdiocese, and it loops back into, say, Pope John Paul II, whom I write something about because I personally was sent to Rome back when I was an slave to one of these people. I talk about that in my article. I also discuss how Pope Francis, connects to this whole thing. And I can't add that here, but I have shared the mind-blowing, and maybe it's not mind-blowing to you, news that, yeah, Elizabeth owned an unusual store in Times Square at a time when Times Square was at the seediest. Okay. I am really curious to hear your thoughts on this. I will say that in the article, the parts that I have not read, you will, I have included more information on Rachel Chandler. I don't know if you guys know that I wrote a book about Rachel Chandler. It's only available on, and you know what? I'll leave a link here. It's called Chasing Chandler, where I go into her family history and her connections to Sean Diddy Puffy Combs and her connection to the music industry and how she's connected to the music industry. And so I include information about that. And there's just there are a lot of moving parts, but all these moving parts go back historically. They continue to present day. And I attach, let's just say I attach receipts to all of the comments and all of the work that I share on Substack. The receipts are all there. You can see them. I provide links, I provide photos, and I've not seen one person do a podcast about the connections of, let's say, Pope Francis to the JE situation, but I wanted to let you know that it does exist, and that if you are on my Substack, um, maybe take a leap of faith and join, because what I cannot share on this platform, I definitely share there. Again, follow me on Insta, Real Kirby Summers, and hey, I'll just keep bringing you as much information as I can, and I appreciate those of you who take the time to like this. Give it a like, subscribe, and we will talk soon. Okay, guys, have a good day. Bye.